Chapter 11 of Puss in Boots, Jr., The Little Blue Chauffeur. Let me see. In the last story, we left little Puss Jr. and the pretty maid in the bakerman's wagon on board the ferry boat. Well, as soon as they reached Candytown, the pretty maid went to her dressmaking store, and after she had thanked Puss Jr. for his kindness in bringing her safely to town, she gave him a hug, and then they parted. She to make dresses and bonnets, you know, and Puss to seek his fortune. And just then he heard a little bird in a cage singing, "Little blue chauffeur, come blow your horn. The streets are so crowded from early dawn. Where's the policeman upon his beat? There he is watching you on the street. Go slowly, or surely the cop. My little blue chauffeur, your auto will stop." Puss Jr. looked around, and there sat a little boy in his toy automobile, and the little bird in the cage whistled, just like a police whistle, loud and shrill, and then swung back and forth on her swing as merrily as could be. "She's my bird!" cried the little boy, looking at Puss Jr. with admiration, and especially at his red-topped boots. "Would you like to ride in my automobile?" Of course Puss did, and pretty soon he was riding up and down as nice as you please. After a little while, Puss Jr. got out and thanked the little boy, and then he went on his way, for he was a restless cat, as you have learned, and he couldn't stay very long in one place. He was a traveler, and fond of new faces and new places. Well, by and by it grew dark, and he had to look about him for a place to sleep, for there were no houses in sight, nothing but a long dreary road in front of him, and woods and fields on either side. "Hey-ho, this isn't very nice," he cried, as he entered the woods. "I guess I'll climb up into this tree. It'll be safer up there than down on the ground." So he took off his boots and held them in his teeth and climbed up the tree. But just as he reached the first limb, an old owl poked his head out of a hole and said, "Who is that?" "Puss in Boots, Jr." And then Puss drew his sword, for he didn't know whether the old owl meant to harm him or not. "Put up your sword," said the old bird. "I'll not harm you, for I know your father, the famous Puss in Boots, who is seneschal to my lord of Carabas. Many a night have I hooted about the castle and helped your daddy catch mice, for there were lots of those pesky little animals in the old castle. Come inside my house and sleep for the night." And Puss accepted the old owl's kind invitation, and in the next story you shall hear what he did when he woke up. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12 of Puss in Boots, Jr. in New Mother Goose Land, The Little Dapple Motor Car. You must remember that Puss Jr. is still traveling in New Mother Goose Land, and that is the reason why airships and automobiles, and goodness knows, perhaps submarines, are taking the place of old-fashioned wagons and balloons. Well, one fine morning, as he was trudging along Motor Goose Road, he came to a neat little garage, outside of which a small boy stood looking very sad indeed. "What is the matter?" asked Puss, stopping to wipe the dust from his red-topped boots. "Oh dear," replied the boy. "I had a little motor car, and it was dapple gray. For eyes it had 2 lamps of brass to see along the way. I lent it to a lady to ride about the town. She ran into a motor bus and broke my auto down. She smashed the pretty lamps of brass and punctured every tire. I would not lend my auto now for any lady's hire." "That's too bad," said little Puss Jr. "I'm very sorry. I once met a little boy who had a dapple gray pony, and the same thing happened when he lent it to a lady. She whipped him and lashed him and rode through the mire, and the little boy never let anybody ride his pony again." And then Puss Jr. said goodbye, and went upon his way, and by he came to a high mountain, on the top of which stood a stately castle. "Let me see," he said to himself. "Shall I climb up to the castle, or shall I keep to Motor Goose Road?" But, being a venturesome little cat, he decided to visit the castle. For who knows, he thought, but what a wicked giant may live there, and I haven't seen a giant since I climbed up the beanstalk. So up he went, and by he came to the castle wall, where he knocked loudly. But no one opened the gate, although he finally beat upon it with the hilt of his sword. Perhaps a sleeping beauty is dreaming in the palace chamber, he said, and then he looked about for a way to enter, for he was determined to gain an entrance. So he took off his boots and climbed over the wall, which surrounded the courtyard. It was deserted, so he pushed open the castle doors and entered. I think this was very brave in him, all alone with nothing but his trusty sword to depend upon. But as soon as he entered the great hall, a little mouse ran up to him and said, "Come with me, for the princess is asleep." And in the next story, I will tell you what Puss Jr. did. End of chapter 12.
Chapter 13 of Puss in Boots, Jr. in New Mother Goose Land. Waking the Princess. Perhaps you think it very strange that in New Mother Goose Land there should be a sleeping beauty. But why not? She had been asleep for so long that New Mother Goose Land was discovered by Puss Jr. before she woke up. And as I was telling you in the last story, he followed the mouse, who led him through the castle, up the velvet stairway, until they came to the room where the beautiful princess lay asleep. "My dear mistress will not wake," said the little mouse, the tears coming to her eyes. She didn't seem to be the least afraid of Puss Jr., which is rather strange, isn't it? But perhaps she felt he was different from ordinary cats. And of course she was right in this. Puss Jr. then took his sword from the scabbard and held it up so that the sunbeams through the window made it flash and glitter. Then he said in a soft voice, "Princess, by my trusty sword I will break the charm. You shall waken from your dreams and be safe from harm." And he waved his glittering weapon once, twice, and thrice, and lo and behold, the lovely princess opened her eyes and smiled. And then Puss Jr. knelt down and kissed her hand in a gallant way, while she patted him on the head and said, "You have broken the spell under which I've lain asleep all these lovely days. You shall be seneschal in my castle, for I am sure you must be Puss in Boots, Jr. For I have met Puss in Boots, seneschal to my Lord of Carabas, and you are the very image of that famous cat." And after that the beautiful princess arose and rang a little bell, and all her retainers, who had also been under the spell, awoke, and the castle became as busy as it was before the wicked fairy, whose name I can't remember, cast her spell over them. "Your Highness," said Puss Jr., "I am indeed flattered at your kind offer to make me seneschal to your castle, but I am a traveler, and I have the love of adventure in my heart. Therefore I cannot accept your kind offer, but must be on my way. For when the winds blow, they call me to go over the grasses and over the snow. I must be going where the wind's blowing. I am a rover forever and oh." Of course the princess felt very sorry to have Puss Jr. go, but she saw there was no use in asking him to remain. So she gave orders to the royal chef to put up a fine lunch for him. And then our little hero started off upon his journey of adventure. End of chapter 13. Chapter 14 of Puss in Boots, Jr. in New Mother Goose Land. Jack and Jill. As Jack and Jill went up the hill, their motor car broke down. Oh dear, we greatly fear we'll never reach the town." Then out Jack got, and off did trot as fast as he was able. "Come, Farmer Cross, lend me a horse from out your big red stable." "All right, my lad, I shall be glad to let you have my mare. She'll pull you through, for she's true blue, and land you safely there." And Jill and Jack, when they got home, ran up to pat and hug her, and then with care they fed the mare a great big lump of sugar. And this is the way it happened, you see. in New Mother Goose Land, and of course, Puss Jr. was there, and the first thing he said was, "You are not at all like Jack and Jill in Old Mother Goose. No, not a bit." "Why? What were they like?" asked Jill, turning from the mare and patting Puss Jr. "What was Jill like, my dear?" "Well, in the first place," answered Puss, "they went up the hill their pail to fill, but halfway down Jack broke his crown. You see, he slipped and fell, and the water splattered all over me, and my boots were half full, and oh dear me, I was a sight." And just then the mare looked at Puss and neighed. And would you believe it? She was the same gray mare who carried the farmer's daughter so rosy and fair. "Helloa, my little pussy friend," she said. And then, of course, Puss had to tell Jack and Jill all about the accident, and how she had fallen down and broken her knees when the raven flew by and frightened her with his dismal croak. "You are a most amusing little cat," said Jack. "It seems to me you know almost everybody in Mother Goose." "So I do," replied Puss Jr. "But I must say I'm getting surprises every minute now that I'm traveling in New Mother Goose Land. You see, at first, I expect everybody to do the same things over again, but they don't." "Ha ha!" laughed Jack. "My dear Puss, we've just had new plumbing put in, and all we have to do now is turn a little faucet, and we get all the water we want. No more trips up the hill to fetch a pail of water for Jill and me." "Well, let me take the mare back for you," said Puss. And with this, he jumped on her back and set off for Farmer Cross's farm. And in the next story, you shall hear of an accident. End of chapter 14.
Chapter 15 of Puss in Boots Jr. in New Mother Goose Land. New Man in the Moon. It didn't take Puss Jr. long to ride the mare back to Farmer Cross's barn, because she was a good roadster, and Puss knew how to ride. Farmer Cross was glad to see his mare again, although, of course, he knew that Jack and Jill would return her just as soon as they reached home. I'm telling you all this in case you don't remember in the last story how Jack and Jill met with an accident and asked the kind farmer to lend his mare to pull their automobile home for them. And on their arrival home, Puss Jr. happened to meet them, and that is how he came to ride the mare back to her master. Well, after that, Puss Jr. set out once more upon his journey of adventure, and after a little while, the man in the moon came down too soon. In fact, it was only noon. He said with a sigh, "Oh dear, what shall I do till the man in the sun has passed by?" "The man in the moon whom I once met," said Puss, looking at the queer person now standing in front of him, "asked his way to Norwich. And then he went south, and he burnt his mouth by eating cold plum porridge." Yes, I know," answered the man petulantly. "He was a cousin of mine. But you must remember that was in Old Mother Goose Land. I come from the New Moon, and this is New Mother Goose Land." Then, as quick as a wink, he crept into a chink of a cloud that was sailing up over the brink of a hill in the west where the sun goes to rest after he shone all day at his best. And at length when the sun his journey had run, the Moon Man his travels had only begun. So you see, by this time it was evening, and Puss Jr. was still trudging along Motor Goose Road, and oh dear me, he was very tired and dusty, and the road was hard, and on either side there were signs at regular distances, "Keep off the grass," and "No trespassing allowed," so that little Puss did not like to leave the broad highway. How he longed for a shady path through the woods. He was just about to sit down and rest when he came to a trolley line. And in the next story, you shall hear how he took his first trolley ride in New Mother Goose Land. End of chapter 15.
Chapter 16 of Puss in Boots, Jr. in New Mother Goose Land. The trolley car. You remember in the last story how tired little Puss Jr. was when he came to the trolley line. You see, he'd been traveling all day along Mother Goose Road, and it was hard on his feet, and his red-topped boots were nearly worn through, and it was supper time, too, and, well, you know how tired you get just about supper time. So he stopped at the little covered station house and waited for a car. And there was a jolly party of boys and girls waiting too, and while they waited they sang this little song. Ride on the trolley to Banbury Cross. Our auto is busted, we can't get a horse. Ring up the car fare and turn on the brake, for we're in a hurry, for fear we'll be late. And just then along came the trolley car, and everybody jumped on board, and away they went, the bell ringing loudly, and the conductor singing out, "Fare, please, this car for Banbury Cross." Well, Puss Jr. paid his nickel, or maybe 10 cents, I don't remember which, and by, when it was quite dark, they reached Banbury Cross, and everybody got off. So Puss followed the crowd up the street where the lights were burning brightly, and the shop windows were lighted up to show all the pretty things for sale. And then, all of a sudden, he saw in a window a book of Puss in Boots with the portrait of his father on the cover. Yes, it was just like the book our little hero had found so long ago up in the garret, and it made him think of the time when he had started out to find his dear father, just because he had seen this little book that day on the garret floor. But oh, wasn't that long ago! He had found his father, but then he wasn't content to stay with him, but must needs go traveling again, and here he was, all alone in New Mother Goose Land in a strange city. "Hey-ho," said Puss, "it makes me homesick to see that little book." Then he went inside the shop and bought it, and the little old man who stood behind the counter laughed out loud and said, "Bless my soul, is this Puss in Boots?" "Not exactly," replied our small traveler. "You see before you his son, Puss Jr." At which the little old man was so delighted that he invited Puss to spend the night with him in the little shop, for he had a nice little room in the rear with a small white bed and a stove and a table and a few things to make it very comfortable. So Puss stayed with him, and the next day started out again. But what happened after that, you must wait to hear in the next story. End of chapter 16.
Chapter 17 of Puss in Boots, Jr. in New Mother Goose Land. Queerville. As I told you in the last story, Puss spent the night with the little old man who kept the bookshop, and early the next morning he helped him dust and fix the books in the window. And then he tucked his own little book of Puss in Boots under his arm and set off again on his journey of adventure. And by, he saw a strange sight. There was an old woman went up in a rocket, 17 times as high as the sun. But where she was going nobody could tell, and under her arm she carried a gun. "Old woman, old woman, old woman," we said, "why are you flying so high overhead?" "I'm going a shootin' stars," she said, "when all you people are safe in bed." By this time there was a great crowd, for it was a most unusual thing, even in New Mother Goose Land, where airships and submarines were common as trolley cars, to see an old woman go up into the sky on a rocket, and it wasn't the 4th of July either. "She's very careful," said Puss with a grin. "Yes, she is, maybe," said a farmer at his elbow. "But if you are an observing young cat, you will notice there are very few stars in the daytime, so she has to wait until night to do her hunting. But I have my opinion of people who go shooting stars. Why don't they shoot ducks?" "That's what I say," replied little Puss, Jr. "But what town is this, may I ask?" The farmer pushed back his big straw hat and said, "Before I tell you its name, let me say that it's full of queer and foolish people. You see one already on a rocket up in the sky, 17 times as high as the sun." Puss Jr. became interested. Here was a place full of adventure. So he said, "Pray, tell me the name of this town, for I am a bit curious." "Queerville," answered the farmer, "and it's the queerest place I ever lived in, let me tell you." "And everybody's queer but me and thee?" laughed Puss, remembering what an old Quaker had once said to him. Just then the old woman was seen coming down to earth at a rapid rate, and before long she landed quite close to Puss Jr. "Oh, dear me!" she exclaimed, in an irritated tone of voice. "I left my bullets in my upper bureau drawer, so I had to come all the way back for them. How provoking!" And off she walked toward her house. And in the next story, I will tell you of another strange person who lived in Queerville. End of chapter 17.
Chapter 18 of Puss in Boots Jr. in New Mother Goose Land. Shooting Stars. You remember where Puss Jr. was in the last story, don't you? Well, in case you have forgotten or didn't read it, I'll tell you. He was in Queerville, New Mother Goose Land. And as soon as the old woman who had just come down from the sky in a rocket walked away, the farmer who had been talking to Puss said to him, "Come with me, for it is getting near supper time. You are a traveler, I see. My good wife and I will be glad to have you spend the night with us." So Puss accepted the invitation, and after supper he went out for a walk with the farmer. And when they came to the village, Puss saw something very, very strange. He was very curious about it. So the farmer said, "There is a man in our town, and he is wondrous bright. They use him for a lamppost to light the streets at night. 'Tis very strange when he is out. He always is most bright, so very different from the usual kind of light." "Well, I should say so," exclaimed Puss, and then he began to laugh, for it certainly was funny to see that man standing on the street corner, shining away just like a big electric light in front of a moving picture show. "I once knew a queer man. He lived in Bramblebush Town," said Puss Jr. "Oh, you mean the fellow who scratched out both his eyes and then scratched them in again?" said the farmer. "Yes, he jumped into Bramblebush," said Puss with a grin. "Well, this man you see like a Statue of Liberty," laughed the farmer, "and he couldn't have been such an awfully old farmer after all, if he had been to New York and seen the Statue of Liberty enlightening the world. Is first cousin to the Bramblebush man. Didn't I tell you this place was full of queer people? Well, I've seen lots of things I never dreamed of in old Mother Goose Land. But since I've been traveling in this country, things seem just as strange. In fact, this lamppost man is about as queer a person as I ever saw." Then suddenly, up in the sky, they saw the old woman on her rocket. And oh dear me, what a lot of shooting stars there were. If it had been the 4th of July, it couldn't have been any better. There were pink and green, blue and yellow, and every kind of colored star, till Puss exclaimed, "Let's go to bed, for my eyes are very tired." And in the next story, I'll tell you what he does when he wakes up. End of chapter 18.
Chapter 19 of Puss in Boots, Jr. in New Mother Goose Land. Dapple Gray was Boggy. Well, when Puss woke up the next morning, he had his breakfast at the house of the kind farmer who lived near Queerville, as I told you in the last story, and then he started out again on his journey of adventure. And after some little distance, Puss Jr. came into the town of Queerville, where he was met by a man who asked him, "Did you see my wife? Did you see my wife looking for me?" She wears a silk hat and a purple cravat and pantaloons over her knee." "No, my good man," replied our small hero, "I have not, although I have seen some very strange sights since I arrived at Queerville." "What, for instance?" asked the man. "Well, first, the old woman who went up on a rocket, and the man who is so bright that you use him for a street lamp to light your town at night," replied Puss Jr., with a grin. "And now you ask me if I've seen your wife with a stovepipe hat and a purple cravat." But before the man could make reply, his wife appeared on the scene. But after all, Puss Jr. didn't think her costume so strange, for she was on horseback, and I myself, although I've never been to Queerville, New Mother Goose Land, have seen many a pretty lady with a silk hat and pantaloons riding horseback. Although I can't be positive about the purple cravats. Well, as soon as Puss Jr. looked up, he knew her to be the lady who had once borrowed the dapple-gray pony from the little boy to ride a mile away. But, of course, that was in old Mother Goose Land, and a long time ago. However, he was anxious to learn what had become of the little dapple pony and his small master, so he lifted his cap and said, "Pardon me, my lady, but were you ever in Mother Goose Land?" "Only once, my cute little cat," she replied with a smile, "and then I had a very hard time riding a little dapple-gray pony who tried to throw me in the mire, so that I had to whip him and lash him before he would behave." "Goodness me!" exclaimed Puss Jr., half to himself. "I wonder if she's telling the truth, for the little boy never said his pony was Baki. He only told me how the lady had lashed him." And just then her horse began to dance, and the next instant away he went as fast as he could down the street. "Whoa, whoa!" called the man. But Puss Jr. didn't wait, for he was tired of the people in Queerville, and wished to see new faces and new places, so off he went, and into the next story we will hear about Johnny and the Pussycat. End of chapter 19. Chapter 20 of Puss in Boots, Jr. and New Mother Goose Land. Hot Catnip Tea. Ding dong bell, Pussy isn't well. Tell me quick the reason why Johnny fed her apple pie. What a naughty boy was that, to give rich pie to Pussycat. I fear just now she will not harm a mouse in Johnny's father's barn. Now, of course, Puss Jr. was very grieved when he heard this, and he inquired if there wasn't a doctor who could cure poor Pussy. But there didn't seem to be any medical man in the neighborhood. You see, nobody had been ill for so long that all the doctors had moved away, and how it happened that Pussycat grew sick after eating the apple pie is a mystery to me. For the apple pie in all New Mother Goose Land was the most delicious pie I ever ate, and you would agree with me, I am sure. Well, there is no use in talking about it any more, for Pussy was certainly very ill, and she looked up at Puss Jr. with such beseeching eyes that our small hero said he would go for a doctor if he had to go 1,001 miles to get him. So he looked around for an automobile or an airship, and then what do you suppose happened? Why, up flew Goosey Goosey Gander, and said, "Master Puss Jr., I was so lonely after leaving you that I have hunted for you ever since." "Well, you've come just in time," cried Puss, jumping on the gander's back. "Now take me as fast as you can to a doctor." And the gander, who was a well-behaved bird, never asked why, but flew away as fast as he could, and by he came to a doctor's house. For the gander was a wise bird and knew more than people thought he did. But the doctor was out, and his wife didn't know when he'd be back, for he had gone a long ways to see an old man who had the whooping cough. So she gave Puss a little pill to give the ding-dong-bell Pussy. And after that Puss Jr. climbed up again on the gander's back, who flew away with him, until they came to another doctor, and he happened to be at home, for his little boy was sick with the measles. "I'm sorry, but I really can't leave," the doctor said, "but I will telephone them what to do." So he called them up on the telephone and told Johnny's father to give the poor pussy cat some hot catnip tea. And just as soon as she drank it, she got perfectly well, although she said when she thought of the pie it made her feel ill again. Then Puss Jr. paid the doctor for telephoning, and, again mounting his gander, rode off in search of further adventure. End of chapter 20.